strive to go beyond the reef of space, to crawl beyond the distant glimmering stars. This world's a room so small within my master's house, the open sky but a portion of his yard. How big is God? How big and wide his vast domain? To try to tell, these lips can only start. He's big enough to rule his mighty universe, yet small enough to live within my heart. As winter's chill may cause the tiny seed to fall, to lie asleep till waked by summer's rain, the heart grown cold will warm and throb with life anew. The Master's touch will bring the glow again. How big is God? How big and wide his vast domain? To try to tell, these lips can only start. He's big enough to rule his mighty universe, yet small enough to live within my heart, yet small enough to live within my heart.
All right. We're going to pick up where we left off. Last time we've been going through Proverbs, and we are looking at anger, okay? Angry man. Of course, the whole theme of Proverbs is getting wisdom, and wisdom helps us to take God's principles and put them into practice in our life, which takes some type of control. And anger is the opposite of that. Anger is when we are out of control. And so we started that last year. We said last week, of course, everyone gets angry every now and then, but we're talking about an excessive anger, out of control anger, and we'll explain that as we go through it because it sounds almost like an oxymoron there. We said that anger itself is not a sin. In Ephesians chapter 4, do we have handouts tonight? Do we not have handouts? Okay. All right, so I'll give you the verses. So you want to open to Proverbs because the verses we'll look at will be in Proverbs. So when I get to each point, I'll give you the verse and you can look at it. We said anger itself is not a sin. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 says, "Be ye angry and sin not." Okay? So we typically notice anger as something where someone is totally out of control. The Bible tells us you can be angry and you can be in control and not sin. Okay? Because we're choosing in the situation to see it for what it is and be upset about it in a proper way. But we also said when someone has trouble with anger, it is a manifestation of a self-control problem. And constant anger is a sign of an immature Christian. We learned that in James. James says that God brings situations into our life so that we can learn patience. And when we learn patience, it makes us perfect, mature, entire. It just gives us everything we have to be a mature, righteous Christian. And so when we react wrong to it, we are not learning the lessons that God has for us in that situation. And actually, it's more hurtful to us. Now, let me just briefly state what we looked at last week. If you weren't here, you can get it online. We said, number one, the angry man handles the situations of life just like the fool would. In other words, anger doesn't necessarily make you a fool, but if you don't handle your anger correctly, you will react to that situation the same way a fool would. Even though we may not be fools, and I think if you were fools, you probably wouldn't be here tonight unless someone drug you in and made you come. But it would, even though we're not foolish, we do have a desire for God in some way, or we wouldn't be here. If we don't handle things right, we sometimes act in a situation the way a fool would. Anger is one of the things that will make us do that. Number two, an angry man will create and increase problems for all those with whom he is around. Okay? They don't cause problems just for themselves. They cause problems for everybody, and we talked about that. Number three, an angry man is always getting himself into trouble. Doesn't just cause trouble for others. He's always causing trouble for himself also. Anger does that. Number four, and this is really a key one if you're trying to help somebody or if you have a serious anger problem, helping an angry man with his problems without getting to the root is a waste of time. Okay, in other words, in anybody's life, there's the fruit of an action, but there is the root of what's causing it. The angry man, and really many people, they want you to help them sometimes with the fruit of what they're doing. And you can't really help with the fruit unless you destroy the root. The root is causing the fruit. And so if you deal with the fruit, that fruit's dealt with, but new fruit's growing up because the root's not been dealt with. The root of their problem is what? Excessive anger. That's got to be dealt with. If not, they go from problem to problem to problem to problem to problem. Number five, an angry man, and this is where we ended, an angry man is someone you do not want to be a close friend with or spend time with. Proverbs chapter 22-24, you'll want to flip over there because that's really the next verse of our next point. Proverbs 22-24. It says, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go. Now, we talked about that last week. So there's many reasons we don't want to be around an angry person. We mentioned some of them, right? He's always getting himself in trouble. He's always getting others in trouble who's around him, and he's acting foolishly. And, of course, we don't want to be around a fool. Companion of fools shall be destroyed. There's many reasons why we don't want to. Here's another one, and this is number 6. This is new. Look at verse 25. It says, make no friendship with an angry man, lest thou learn his ways and get a snare to his soul. Not only do you don't want to hang around them, the reason we don't want to hang around them is because if we hang around them, we are going to learn and become just like he is. You cannot help but become like those whom you spend time with. Biblical principle. So you say, well, I don't want to be like that. If you hang around a person like that, they're a close friend. You hang with, you're going to be just like them. That's going to happen. And you need to be very careful about that. Did any of you ever have somebody in your family where somebody you hung around with and your parents said, hey, don't hang around with that kid, right? Okay? And most of the time, if your parents told you not to hang around with that kid's parents were telling him not to hang around with you either, all right? So that we know how that works. But why? Because you're becoming just like them. By the way, if you're raising children, I would especially not let them hang around someone who has an anger issue. Now, any other issues also I wouldn't, but man, anger is a bad one. They're going to learn their ways, and then that causes them to start experiencing all of the problems that a person who has an anger problem will experience. Because when you become like them, now you are violating these biblical principles. By the way, here's a sad thing. I'm not giving this as an excuse for some of you if you were raised in this situation. We'll get to you in a minute. But parents, you are putting your kids down a perilous path if you have an anger problem. You are. By the way, I've been doing this long enough, and I've talked to people and dealt with people with anger problems, and sometimes you almost see it in their children. You see you see that almost like when they're around the parent who's angry, they don't say a word. They almost have that whip puppy look about them. By the way, that's a dangerous kind of anger. That's a kind that they get the anger where it just stays inside and then it just blows up. They don't know how to react. But you're putting your children on that path. Now, if you're an adult and you've grown up, you said, man, that's the problem. That's why I have anger issues, because I grew up in a family where there was anger. Let me say this. I'm sorry you had to do that, but you are saved now. You don't have to be like that anymore. Listen, I grew up around a lot of nonsense. A lot of nonsense. I didn't get saved until I was in high school, and I did not have, my mom did the best she could. She was a single mom, but she had to work, and to be honest with you, I knew how to get around the rules, and I knew how to do what I wanted to do. There was a lot of garbage I grew up with, but can I just tell you something? When I got saved and I got right with God, I had to chuck that stuff. I can't use the fact that, I grew up without a father. I don't know how to be a father, so that's no excuse. I have children. I better learn how to be a father. Well, I just grew up, and that's just my weak. Okay, it's a weakness, but you need to get over it. And by the way, by God's power, when you're saved, you can. Don't have this. Sometimes we have this fatalistic approach to things that's just how I am. I'm never going to be over with it. I just can't overcome it. No, you cannot overcome it yourself. But by the power of God, you can overcome it. And there's a lot of negatives we're going over. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm telling you what the Bible says. But when we get to the end, I'm going to tell you some ways we can get over it. Okay? But we got to be very careful. It starts with who we're around. Let's make sure in our families as parents and even as siblings, let's not have that excessive anger. Yeah, I know. Everybody gets upset every now and then. I get it. But I'm talking about that constant. But let's be careful who we're around. Be careful. And a lot of times, we get on the teenagers, like, watch your friends, because, boy, it's important for teenagers. When I was a youth director and we had good teenage kids, if they started to kind of take a left turn, I always knew what it was. 95% of the time, it was somebody. And by the way, with all the social media stuff going on, it's easier to get connected to somebody like that now. It's always, I can bring them in and say, I notice your attitude's down a little bit. What's going on? It's always somebody. They're around somebody or something that's starting to take them off a different direction, trying to influence them. Be very, very careful about that. An angry man reproduces himself in those who do hang around with them. Number 7. This is a warning to all of us. An angry man's lack of self-control makes him defenseless from all kinds of destructive influences. An angry man's lack of self-control makes him defenseless from all kinds of destructive influences. You're in Proverbs chapter 22. Flip over three chapters. Proverbs 25, verse 28. The number one, I believe, characteristic of somebody who has a lack of self-control, I think number one characteristic is they have an anger issue. Okay? But it's talking about a person who doesn't have that self-control. Proverbs chapter 25 and verse 28. He that hath no rule over his own spirit, can't control himself. Okay? Here's what it is like a city that is broken down and without walls. You say, what in the world does that mean? Here's what it means. Back in those days, they didn't have the sophisticated weaponry that we have today. The greatest defense that they could have for their city was a wall. They would build a wall around the city, and if another country or nation came up against them to war, before they could get to them, the first thing would have to do is break through the wall. They had to get in. It wasn't easy. On Sunday nights, we're talking about Daniel. We're talking about Babylon when Belshazzar was there. Belshazzar, the wall around Babylon they were very sophisticated, very tall. There was several sets of them, and they had set it up where they had water and supplies. They could have taken care of themselves. The laws locked down. History tells us for about 20 years. They were so secure in their wall that Belshazzar was partying when the Medes were at his front door, because it would take time. Now, there was a loophole, and they were able to get in because of God's judgment on their life. But that's what it took. It could take several years for them. And so they would have to have a protracted type of attack to get into some of the higher cities, the stronger countries. But what Proverbs is saying here is, when you have no rule over your own spirit, you're like a city where the walls broke down, it's torn down. They have no defense system. None. If the army comes in, they're going to meet you straight up because they don't have a wall they have to get through. It's a lot easier for them to come in. That's what a person that lacks self-control is like. They don't have a defense system, and they are, you could almost say, gullible or they're vulnerable to all types of destructive influence. Why? They have no self-control. An angry person is impetuous. They just, that's how they are in all of their life if they're not careful. And you're out of control. You're constantly making quick decisions with our bad. You're constantly just doing this and doing that. And you have no control. And you are in for a very hard time. But a person that has self-control, they can take care of themselves. By the way, that lack of self-control isn't just in anger. It invades every single area of your life. Every single one. Turn over to Philippians chapter 3. I want you to see a couple verses. Keep your finger there in Proverbs. I want you to see these verses. As particularly this one little phrase. It's like, man, this is kind of, it's showing where we're at. Philippians chapter 3, look at verse number 17. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Philippians, okay? Not the Philippines, Philippians. Not Colombia either, okay? Philippians 3:17 says, "Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I've told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ." They were having trouble discerning people. He's saying, be very, very careful about it. Look at this. He mentioned these people are the enemies of Christ because they're saying one thing and they're living another way. He says, whose end is destruction. They're going to have problems. And look at that little next phrase. Whose God is their belly. Does that mean they overeat? I'm not going to say that because Christmas is right around the corner. Have at it, cowboy. Go to town twice, go to town 3 times, and then the day after, have leftovers. What it's saying is their God, and the picture there is their belly, is their desires. Their desires are their God. They follow whatever desire they have. That's where we're at. People do whatever they feel like doing. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is we are flesh, and therefore our desires are wrong, and they're sinful, and they're carnal, and they're going to push us the wrong way. And so if our God is our desires, then we're going to be following them, and we don't have enough self-control to say, yes, I have a desire for that, but that desire is wrong. And don't give me this stuff. People have alcoholism and now homosexuality, you name it. Well, I was born that way, or it's an illness. Can I just tell you something? Drug addiction is not an illness. Someone made a choice that first time, and it became addictive, and they had no control to stop it. Their God is their belly, or whatever it is. But we have to give them an excuse so they can keep going down the path. No, our fleshly, wrong, carnal, sinful desires were never stopped. Okay? By the way, we all have wrong desires. Even those that don't get angry very often, there's times you want to. And you're like, yeah, that's not right. But a person that has no self-control, their desires run their life, they do whatever comes to mind. Whatever happens, it just pops up. Why is it wrong for us to follow our desires? The wrong desires. Flip over to James chapter 1. Remember, this is all masked around the thing that a lack of self-control, you are open to all kinds of wrong influences which ultimately lead to destruction. James chapter 1, verse number 14. This tells us how Satan tempts us. How does he get us to sin? How does he get us to do wrong? Okay, here we go. 1:14. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own, what's the word there? Lust, desire, and enticed. Now, the word drawn away and enticed, these are words they would use of a trap, baiting a hook, setting a trap. Okay? Satan sets a trap for us. He baits that hook. He sets the trap. Well, we know what the bait is. You know what the bait is? It's going to be something that's our lust. And we think of lust, we think of one primary sin, which is immorality. That's a tough one. That's a big one, particularly for men. They got to fight. But it could be anything, any sin. Then when lust hath conceived, he says, what he's saying is, Satan tempts us with our lust. He puts it on the trap. We take into it. And then it's almost like now the pictures of a baby. Then when lust hath conceived, we give into it. It conceives. What is the fruit of that? Conception, marriage. The fruit of marriage is conception, which is a child. Well, what is the fruit here? It bringeth forth sin. And sin, when is it finished, bringeth forth death. So see, we have to keep those sinful desires in check. By the way, it's not wrong to be tempted. All of us will be tempted. Now, it's wrong to give temptation help. If you're hanging around with a foolish man, you're hanging around with an angry man, you're putting yourself in a bad situation. Well, I struggle with drinking. The other day I was at the bar and I almost had a drink. What are you doing at the bar? First of all, even if you don't drink, what are you doing at the bar? There's a certain group. I was hanging around this group. Well, what are you doing around them? We put ourselves in those situations. Satan doesn't need any help. I don't know if you knew that. But if we have no self-control, this very thing that Satan's going to use, our desires, to get us to do wrong, if we have no self-control, we're making it easy for him. I wish that we had as much discernment as the rats that lived in my garage. I put out mousetrap after mousetrap after mousetrap, and he just got fatter and bigger. Couldn't get him. We put peanut butter on the mousetrap. The peanut butter's gone. The mouse is, and it's almost like you could hear him burp. That was good. You got anything else? He was slick. The first one we have, I don't know what happened to him. We never caught him. I think he just moved out. He got bored. He goes, "This is too easy. I'm gonna go somewhere else." And then we had another one, and finally I found out what it takes to kill him. Just little pellets that have poison in them. Yeah, I just threw them everywhere. And within the next day, boom, he was dead. Then we got another one. I threw it in there. He was dying, and my wife went in there to do laundry, and she didn't have her shoes on. She stepped right on top of him. She didn't see him because he was laying there dying, and all I heard was screaming, "Ah!" Like, homeboy was struggling. He was done, So, he was struggling, so I helped him go to meet the Lord, and he died. But, the first rat I had, he had no problem getting away. But when we have no self-control, Satan throws these things out, and our God is our belly, our desires are who we go after, and we just fall for all that nonsense. How come I'm always going from one problem to another? Because you're lacking self-control, and you don't have a wall system. By the way, a wall system's good. Sometimes we get target. Oh, you guys believe in rules for your school. I know, those are walls. Those are walls. I mentioned on Sunday night, but I got an email. This guy wrote a book many years ago about getting men into church because typically, now we have a great group of men in our church, but a lot of churches, you'd be surprised, 70, 80% women because the church is chasing them away. We put up we put a picture of a feminine-looking guy in a white dress and sandals and say that's Jesus. Now, I wouldn't worship that. That's not Jesus. Jesus was a real man. Okay, he was not some feminine angel with long flowing hair and earrings. Okay, that wasn't him. Jesus was a man. But this guy, he made some points. It was okay. But he started this ministry. Now he's going overboard. I got an email from him, and he said, one reason men aren't coming to church is because we're not letting them get physical with the girls in the church. Yes. And then he made this stupid comment. By the way, he's never pastored. I guarantee it. You know, listen, we tell them to make sure they're compatible emotionally and mentally. But they got to find out if they're compatible physically. I have a word for that. Idiot. First of all, look, if I'm physical and then I'm kissing some other man's wife if I don't marry her. Plus, he doesn't understand. This has nothing to do with this, but we're good. He doesn't understand men. Ladies, let me help you with men. So, okay, let me help you with men. I'm going to help you. We're not happy with just step one. No, let's just hold hands. Guess what? I want more. Oh, there's something wrong with you. You know what's wrong with me? I'm a real man. I'm male. Therefore, I like females. If I'm holding your hand, that's not enough. Well, we'll just hug. That's not enough. Well, we'll just kiss. That's not enough. It's really quiet in here. Ladies, no. The guy says that he can control himself. He is a liar. I'm just telling you. No, we can do that because we're just friends. That was the best pickup line in high school. We're just friends. Okay? But anyhow, I don't know where they got. But we're because we're taking those steps down there. Lust, our desires. We have to put them in check. There's got to be a wall there because once you pass a certain wall, I don't care how. Look, many good people have done things wrong in all kinds of areas. You know what happened? Because in any area, you name the area, deceitfulness, you name it. They took one step past that wall, and then once they did, they got themselves in a little too much, and emotions and everything else takes over. The situations take over. Why not stay on this side of the wall? Okay? But a person that's angry, they lack self-control, and they're going to get themselves in trouble. Okay, I hope we understood that. If not, we had a really good time. Number 8. An angry man uplifts and abounds in that which is wrong and sinful. If you have your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 29. Proverbs chapter 29, and we'll look at verse 22. An angry man uplifts and abounds in that which is wrong and sinful. Now you say, well, you're making some blanket statements. And I get it. There's probably some steps, right? You get a little bit angry and you start to get out of control and you experience some of these things. But as you continue to let it go, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse until you're really getting into some things that can be very destructive in your life. An angry man uplifts and abounds in that which is wrong and sinful. Proverbs 28:29. An angry man stirreth up strife. It's almost like, let me get it going. We looked at that. And a furious man aboundeth in transgression. Abounding in transgression. What does abounding mean? It means abundant in quantity, size, number, and quality. That means a lot. A lot. Abounding. A lot of sin, and not just sin, the quality, a lot of bad sins. As they go on, it gets worse and worse. Okay? You know what transgression really means? It really, you can almost say, a moral revolt. We're transgressing against God's command. We're revolting against it. A person that has an anger issue, they're going to start stepping into that. There's going to be much going on, a lot of bad things. See, it's a serious issue because it starts leading us down that path. And the more we go down that path, the deeper we get in, and the worse things get. That's why we got to fight at the front end. So, well, I think I have an anger issue. Start working on it. Don't allow yourself, don't excuse yourself to be able to do that. Look it straight in the eye and say, that's because of my sinful flesh, my sinful desires. It's wrong. I'm allowing it, and I'm going to fight it right now. I'm going to fight it. Don't give in to it. People excuse all the times. We mentioned that when we are angry, we are literally out of control. So how do we have that freedom? And look at James chapter 1. Keep your finger in Proverbs, James chapter 1. I want us to see this. People they think these two words go together, but to be honest with you, they do. James chapter 1 and verse 25. says, whoso looketh into the perfect, now look at these three words, law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. Talking about the word of God. It's the law of liberty. We talk about freedom in Christ. You know what freedom is? Freedom comes from living within the boundaries of God's law. We think, spiritually speaking, freedom comes outside of those boundaries. It's a shame to see people, and they'll go to a church that will excuse things like drinking. Drinking is really now excused in almost every Christian circle, along with all kinds of other garbage. Just read the Bible. Read the consequences of strong drink and tell me God's for it. Really? You don't have to have an IQ higher than that Christmas bulb to understand that it's wrong. Well, I have freedom in Christ to do that. Do you understand all of the destructive influences that come from that sin? And you can just name any other sin. It's not just we think law is there to restrict us. Law is not there to restrict us. Laws are what give us freedom. Without laws, there's anarchy. Every man doing that which was right in his own eyes. There's a whole book in the Bible about it, the book of Judges. Read it and tell me you don't get confused. Especially when you get to the back half of the book, it's like, what is that all about? I'll tell you what it's about. People that were doing whatever they wanted. That's what it's about. And when they did, it didn't turn out very well. Liberty comes within the confines of God's law. Sin is not free. Sin is restrictive. The only way to have true freedom is to avoid it. Find out what God says. I can do my own thing. I'm my own man. First of all, you're not a man if you can't do God's thing. Okay, I don't want to hear that. It takes a man to do God's thing. But freedom comes within God's law. It is the law of liberty. Those that do whatever they want and think that they can somehow skirt God's laws, that's not freedom. You'll find out later, or you're finding out right now. Number 9. We have 2 more and then we'll go. An angry man will not make an attempt to hide his anger. An angry man, usually speaking, or as it gets worse, they get to the point where they do not attempt to hide their anger. Now look at Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 16. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 16. Proverbs 12:16 says, a fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covereth shame. Presently known means everybody knows it. Have you ever seen that in public? By the way, if you have an issue with somebody, dealing with it loudly in front of everybody, yelling and screaming at each other, doesn't help it. It doesn't help. Years ago, we were at a buffet. It was a buffet over, it was on PCH. It used to be an Asian buffet. We were in there, and this guy and his wife were arguing. It was not really loud, but you could tell that they weren't having a good day together. And so he got up to go get some food, and everybody was in this room here, and one of the workers had left a broom there, leaning against the wall. And as he walked by, he grabbed the broom, turned around towards his wife, and said so everybody could hear, here's how you're getting home. I personally thought that was pretty funny, okay? And then I'm thinking, man, I hope his couch is comfortable because that's just not going to work. But see, you get out of control and you got to argue in front of everybody loudly. That doesn't work. I remember many years ago when we still had the 2-story house here, and I had my office was on the bottom floor. I heard yelling and screaming. During the middle of the day, I opened my door, and here's a couple across the street. I don't think they live here anymore. But, I mean, he was standing there, and she was in his face yelling as loud as she could. And I'm like, wow, I'm glad I'm not married to that. That's not helpful, though. You see, that's when you take a disagreement to the point where now you're destroying everything. You're not even trying to work on the situation. But when someone's angry and they get to that point, they just can't deal with it. You see it all over. By the way, road rage. Was out like about 3 or 4 Thursdays ago. The girls and I got here for church a little early on Thursday night, and some of these cars, we parked over here. The cars were honking at each other. They pull around the corner, and they get out. So I'm like, hey, we're going to see like, not the wrestling, what's the other one? MMA right here. And a guy gets out of the car, and the other guy gets out of the car, and they're yelling and screaming in each other's face. And then here comes the lady in the car. And she's all up, and I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Now, eventually, cooler heads did prevail. There was no fight, so can't tell you how that turned out. It's like, real. I mean, they were mad because someone cut them off, and it cost them time. How much time did it cost them to pull over, get out of the car, yell and scream at each other, and then get back in the car and take off? They lost a lot more time. You ever notice sometimes it's just, and I know we all get frustrated, but it's just, what frustrates me is when someone comes in my lane because they're texting. You ever see that they're in your lane, you get by them, you look at them, they're texting, and it's like, don't do that. Okay? But we're just we get married. We get mad. Proverbs 10:12, hatred stirreth up strife, but love covereth all sins. It's not helping when you do that. So I don't care what people think. Well, okay, there's another verse in Proverbs for you. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver or gold. By the way, if you have a disagreement, what is the ultimate purpose in it? It's to come to an agreement. Isn't it to fix what's going on? How does that work when you're trying to bring embarrassment upon someone and make yourself look bad? Okay, number 10, and we'll stop. We're done. An angry man lacks understanding. We know this. Proverbs 14:29. Flip over there. Let me give you a couple thoughts and we're done. Proverbs 14:29. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding. Now let me ask you this. Does this man get upset? Yes or no? Yeah. So, obviously it's not wrong, but he's slow to wrath. But he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. It's not that you get upset, it's to what degree do you get upset and how you get upset. See, because a person that has an anger problem, they'll get upset about things they should not get upset about. Okay? And we've all done it. Look, if your child accidentally spills something, you usually get upset, but that's not really something to get upset about. It was an accident. Now, if they're being irresponsible, you get on them for that. But if they tried to stab somebody in school, that's a really good time to get upset. They threaten a teacher or something, that's a good time to teach them. And you're not getting upset because you're out of control. You're showing upset to let them know the seriousness of what they did. Not just you're out of control and you're flying off the handle and you're throwing stuff. No, it's like, do you understand that was wrong? Well, they need to see that, you know what, Dad really believes that was wrong. This isn't just like, I ate my sister's jelly beans, all right? We'll get over that. But it's all in how you take it. You can either react. Angry people react. Something happens, immediately they react and fly off the handle. Bad things are coming. A person that handles it correctly, they don't react, they act. They think about it and say, this is how this needs to be handled. And this is a big deal. And this needs to be handled correctly. They're upset, but they're under control. Okay? Because it's a righteous indignation. It's righteous. They're not out of control. But what's the problem? Why? Well, because the other guy's slow to wrath because he has great understanding. He takes the time to think it through. He's learned enough about God's principles to understand what he should get upset about and what he shouldn't get upset about. And how he should get upset about it. In other words, he's trying to be a wise man. But a person that gets angry, they're not trying to be wise. They're not trying to live God's law the right way. They're just letting stuff fly by, and they react to this, they react to that, and there's no way to live. Let's learn how to think things through. Whenever you don't think a situation through, you just react, you got problems. I don't know how many times I have people come in, they've done something, they say, I did this and it didn't work out. And I'm like, well, why'd you do it? Well, I just had to do something. No, you didn't. You didn't just have to do something. It's better to take your time and think it out and then do something than just to react and then like, oh, that was a bad idea. Well, you didn't think it through. You didn't get God's view on it. And so we'll finish there. Now, next time we are going to talk about how to overcome anger. So we won't do that next week. So you have 2 weeks to still be angry, okay? So work at it for 2 more weeks. Have a good time with it. And then when we come back, I'll tell you how to get over, all right? Just kidding. Let's pray.